back to the Second Party Podcast. My wife and I, a couple days ago, started talking about something we thought would be pretty interesting, so we stopped ourselves kind of mid-conversation or relatively early on and decided we'd sit down and talk about it now. So the conversation started off with us talking a bit about taxes, since we're kind of coming up on tax season.
Oh, favorite time of year.
For everyone,
it's
I'm
the
sure.
most wonderful time of the year.
And our bonuses had come in recently, and so obviously you get to see pretty straightforward what your effective tax rate is. Relatively easy to calculate. And we were looking at that and comparing it to the relative inflation, particularly in the U.S. And you commented something along the lines of never previously being able to clearly observe inflation.
Okay. Yeah, I remember making that comment.
Yeah, so we've talked about this on many occurrences, and it came up when we were discussing inflation here. To the point where when we were having our discussion, I asked, this is the thing that annoys me most. And you knew exactly what I was talking about when I said the thing that annoys me most, because there's only one thing that annoys me most. I'm wildly consistent in this thing. And
there are plenty of things that annoy you.
Yeah, there are plenty of things that annoy me.
But
like everyone. But this one I have deemed the most annoying thing to me every single time. And I have not wavered on this for years now.
Yeah. So I made a comment about inflation because I'm not that old, but part of this might be that I wasn't paying as much attention before, and now I'm, older, so I am paying more attention. But yeah, I think the comment I made was like, right now I feel like I can tangibly see the effects of inflation.
Like in real time.
Unlike I've ever been able to. Like, we keep close tabs on what we spend at Costco and at the grocery stores. And I know, like,
yeah, we have a grocery
these frozen
tracker.
strawberries that used to cost $9.99 cost $10.49 now. And
or certain chips.
What were chips those? used to be $3.99.
Now they're $4.99.
No, they're $4.49 now.
And this is what, a year and a half apart?
Not
if even that.
Not even. No, I'm saying like we could look back 6 months, and those chips cost $3.99. And yeah. I remember the specific shopping trip at Costco where we were, going down the snack aisle, and I was looking at the price tag, like, what happened? This used to be $3.99. These are so cheap. I mean, they're still cheap at $4.49, but I saw, like, in front of my own eyes, 50-cent increase right there.
Yeah.
And it's not just the chips. I mean, so many things.
So I think the big highlight here is that it's not as though one item is clearly increasing in price. And it's not as though the increase is unsubstantial on a percentage basis. So when we have an increase of 50 cents on something that is now $5 essentially, that's a large price increase. Right, we're not talking about 5 or 10 cents, and we're not talking about how
well, that's a 10%.
I've observed inflation previously, which is it's a slow rollout where you find out 4 years later that your grocery bill is 5-6% higher.
Yeah.
Because things increase 10 cents here, 10 cents there pretty slowly over time.
There was a distinct, like, one shopping trip, these chips were $3.99.
Mm-hmm.
And the next shopping trip, they were $4.49.
Yeah.
I remember. And maybe that's part of, like, Costco policy. Like, they did mass price increases across the board, starting effective this date or whatever.
Well, it also wasn't just Costco.
No, not just Costco. I mean, other places where we buy food. I think, like, the protein powder that we buy at Whole Foods, I know that went up.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. There was something else that I was buying recently.
There are gas prices too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going into the gas prices.
Yeah, that's true. Fair.
But there was something else. I can't remember. Something not grocery related that, it was like, this got more expensive. I can tell.
Yeah. And so we were talking previously about kind of comparing the rate of inflation, which, I think you can observe on whatever the government is reporting, right? And that differs from person to person, right? So, for instance, if you're looking at your mortgage, right, you're not seeing, on at least the majority of that, you're not seeing a radical increase in terms of what you're paying on your mortgage. So, if 25% of your take home pay was being spent on your mortgage, well, that wasn't necessarily affected by inflation. But
Okay.
if food goes up 10% or 5%, right, you have to apply it to whatever portion of your take home pay that constitutes. So we're just kind of eyeballing certain numbers relative to the percentage of our take home pay that's being spent on that, whether that be groceries or gas or health and beauty items or whatever. And we were coming to the conclusion that what we got as merit increases or bonuses just kind of, it was very close to what inflation was, which is uncommon, especially for people near our age, as we're relatively speaking early on in our careers. And I want to be clear, I don't think that we are unique in this observation. We've spoken with friends and family, and they've seen similar things, and you can see similar reports in the news, I think, right? I think there's statistical evidence as well as anecdotal evidence to back this up.
That people are seeing the effects of the current inflation.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And when I turned to you earlier and I said, what's the thing that annoys me most? I feel like this is a perfect example of this. Okay. And like I said earlier, this thing that annoys me most does not change. I'm consistent in the thing that annoys me most. The thing that annoys me most is when I suffer the consequences of somebody else's poor choice. And I want to stress that. Somebody else's poor choice. There are plenty of things where something happens to somebody else or something happens to me. And it just happens. Things occur in the world, tragedy strikes. You have a grandparent and they come down with some illness, or something happens with them and they need to move homes, right? And now you have to go and help. I don't take any issue with that. Okay? Now I feel bad for that grandparent or the person who needs that help, but I don't get annoyed with having to help because things happen. Things will happen to me, and I want to be there to help people when they need it, and I'd like people, hopefully, to be able to help me when I need it. So I don't necessarily take an issue with when something negative happens to somebody else and it's totally outside of their control, or even mostly outside of their control, and then I have to help out, or it negatively affects me in some way. Similarly, if something just happens to me, right? Like, for instance, if something just happens to break around me, okay? Things break every so often. You can't prevent every single thing like that from occurring. So I don't have a massive issue with that. What I do take issue with is when somebody else makes a poor decision and I suffer the negative consequences of that. So, for instance, in the case of inflation, I think a relatively watertight argument can be made that many of the policy decisions that have been made, whether that's from the Fed or from the government sending out a bunch of stimulus checks and spending large amounts of money, in either case, these are things that are outside of my control. And yet, at the end of the day, I'm severely negatively affected from an effective earning side of things.
Yeah, I think the qualifier to what you're saying, or how I understand it, is it's not even necessarily like someone made a mistake and made a bad decision, or didn't know what they were doing and made a bad decision, but someone was like actively being ignorant, or what's the word?
Irresponsible?
Ignorant or irresponsible, or there's another word I'm thinking about. And of course, now that I'm trying to think of it, it's, my brain is completely locking it out of my known vocabulary. It's not so much that someone just made a bad decision or a poor decision because they didn't know, they hadn't learned about that, or they made a mistake about something. It's more so when someone's being actively ignorant or irresponsible about something, and you feel like you have no control or power to like no control or power over the situation.
Yeah.
So you feel like it's like you can sit here and scream into the void like, I know the effects of you doing this. Like, don't do this. I know exactly what's going to happen. And the person like just is absolutely oblivious to that. Oblivious is the word I was thinking about.
Oh.
Someone's being completely oblivious to something, and you can see, like, you can put all the pieces together and see those 10 steps ahead, and you're just watching it all play out and waiting for the bad thing to like trickle down to you because you already saw that this is going to happen.
It's like watching a train wreck just right in front of you that you can't
and you can't do anything about it. Right, like if I accidentally like, you know, pulled the car out of the garage and smashed the mirror, and now you are going to be late to work because you have to go get it in. Like, yeah, that would probably annoy you, but I don't know that that falls into the category of like thing that annoys you the most because it's something that I did on accident versus
So
if you had repeatedly time and time again told me, hey, you can't be parking the car in the garage this way. Every time you nearly clip it. And you repeatedly tell me, and I'm just being ignorant to that, and I don't listen, and you can see all the pieces of what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But, like, I just still do it, and then this happens, and you're like, great, now this is affecting me, and I knew this was going to happen.
Yeah. I think maybe the other qualifier that I would have is there's most definitely leniency given to like children, let's say, right? Because children don't understand a lot of the time. You could explain something and it's just not going to fully process, or they're not going to totally remember it every single time, especially when it's something like breaking something or things like that. Things just happen with kids. To your point, yeah, when you're dealing with an adult though, and you have no control, but you can see exactly where the train is headed, and
they're making some stupid decision that you're just waiting for it to come back and the ripple effect to hit you, and you know it's going to.
Yeah. So similarly, and I'm sure that I know that you are particularly annoyed with me on this, and I apologized, but I'm totally fine admitting where like I'm wrong here. So I accidentally did this to you, and admittedly you did warn me about it a little while back. Do you want to talk about that?
What are you referring to? Are you referring to like when we recorded the first whatever podcast episode? Okay. Yeah, well, we were recording one of the, you know, earlier episodes, and there's a learning curve, obviously. You know, we haven't done this before, so like we're kind of learning and figuring out as we go, and there's bumps in the road and things aren't perfect. Probably never will be, but yeah, one of the episodes we were recording, and I think you had like a loose kind of outline of what you wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
You know, it was the one with like the rules, right?
Yeah. And
numbering all of them. And I had said before we sat down, why don't you go through, make sure you have numbers written down for all of them? Because what's going to happen is we're going to stop, you're going to lose track, you're not going to know what number it is, and we have to have things like somewhat in line before we like sit down and turn on, hit record, so that it makes it easier for me later when I have to go edit this, because I'm the one, editing these things. So I had said, let's sit down, like let's write it all out, make it clear to minimize any like editing and splicing we have to go back through. And you were like, no, it's fine. Let's just sit down, let's record, I'll go through it. Yeah. And what happened was we kept having to stop and we, missed numbers and numbers were wrong. And you were like, it's fine. We'll just go back. Let's look through it, start editing. We'll go back later and re-record things that we need to and splice it all together. And I was like, that is not a good idea. This is going to make this so horrible for me trying to piece this all together. And I'm like, I don't really know what I'm doing here yet, right? And I could just see I'm going to have to spend so much time trying to like make this work. And guess what happened?
exactly that.
I had to
And
spend
yeah,
so much time trying to make it work.
and I can imagine how that could be infuriating. Yes.
Yeah, it was pretty infuriating.
So one of the first examples of this, for me at least, when I started realizing that this was the thing that just irked me so much, was back in the era where most people weren't using Bluetooth headphones, myself included. I had a relatively nice pair of in-ear headphones that I would use on a pretty regular basis.
Wired ones?
Yeah, wired ones. You know, the old school, nowadays, quote unquote, old school 3.5 millimeter headphone jack style. And
Phones used to have that?
yeah, and my sister had asked to borrow my headphones. And I said, that's fine. Just be like kind of careful with them because my sister, especially at the time, had a very poor track record of taking care of things, especially things of mine and my dad, since we're more careful of things, more particular. So I handed her the headphones that were kind of wrapped around one of those anti-tangle headphone wrap things. And I told her, make sure not to wrap the headphones too tightly around these. Because if you wrapped them too tightly, the cord, the copper on the inside of the cord, could become detached from the ear driver itself. And as such, your headphones would either be flaky or they wouldn't work. So I told her not to do this. And lo and behold, a couple days later, she returns them to me. And the first time I go to plug these headphones in, it starts off really statically, and as I turn my head one way or the other, it will cut out, which is exactly what happens if you over tighten or over wrap them too tightly around one of the anti-tangle headphone things. I never did get any replacement for those headphones. But anyway, that's when I realized this is the thing that just irks me to no end. It just really gets to me because you suffer these negative consequences for someone else's dumb actions. It's kind of like, it's almost like a double whammy. Not only are you suffering the negative consequences of somebody else's decision, which could have easily been mitigated, right? So in the case of some natural disaster coming, well, nobody could have mitigated this. Things just happen. In the case of what I'm discussing, one could simply take a few simple actions to mitigate things, and this wouldn't happen. Mm-hmm. And on top of this, the person who could have done this didn't. And to add insult to injury, the natural negative consequences that one should have experienced when making a dumb decision, not only are you experiencing them, but they are not experiencing them.
So is this specifically about instances where the offender actually does not experience any consequence for themselves either? Or like it doesn't affect them?
I think
but it affects other people?
It can still be annoying if it affects other people but also affects the decision maker. It's particularly insulting and infuriating when the individual who made the decision goes unaffected. So, for instance, in the case of, let's say, government officials, regardless of which side you're on, these individuals can increase or adjust their salary. Well, these individuals are getting money from either the salary that in some way they're in control of directly via voting for it, or they can simply start demanding higher prices for speeches or ancillary things that they do on the side. Right. So it's relatively speaking, they go unaffected. Generally.
It's a lot easier for them to be unaffected than someone who is, typical working class citizen.
Yeah.
Who is your average consumer at the local supermarket or, the local department store or whatever.
Yeah.
Or, isn't it true that generally, the stock market is relatively unaffected by inflation type things because it will increase with inflation. So if you have a lot of assets in the market,
Yeah, so I would
your
say
wealth will be like less affected, right?
yeah, so I would say the short answer is yes, I believe so. There may be some form of tracking delay, but provided you're not selling, it doesn't matter much. Similarly, those who have homes, right, real estate, provided that the real estate is tracking similar to inflation, which tends to be the case, just like the market as a whole tends to track with inflation. Obviously, you can have different sectors that vary, but generally speaking, assets like those are going to track with inflation in general over time.
Right.
So I want to be clear. Like I'm not sitting here saying, "Woe is me! I have it the worst out of everyone." Right? We have investments in the market, and to some degree, we own real estate. Well, that money is going to, given enough time, track with inflation in the market. Versus something like salaries need to be individually increased, and things like food. When food prices go up on a dollar basis, wages are going to lag behind. We can immediately, like tomorrow, we
Right.
could increase the price of strawberries. It's totally fine. Cub can just change the price in their store, and that's that. But wages tend to lag. So that in between time where the price of groceries, let's say, has gone up, but the price of wages has not, the people who are losing out are the people who have wages and need to buy strawberries. Versus if you A, didn't have wages, or a majority of your wealth or income didn't come from wages, or if B, you didn't have to buy strawberries, which in this case is a stand in for food, so most people are going to need to buy that, then you're more fine.
Right.
And
Well,
that's on a proportional basis. So if you're particularly affluent and your groceries are 5% of your take home versus if you're in poverty, it could be 50% of your take home, right? It affects the person on a relative basis
right.
a lot more
A
if it's
five
50%.
5% inflation increasing grocery costs by 5% is going to be a significantly higher impact on someone who's already struggling to pay the grocery bills
Yeah.
than someone who, yeah, it's a small portion of their income that goes to groceries.
So people who are particularly wealthy with their money, generally speaking, in real estate or the stock market, even if those things don't immediately track, you still have that thing. And as long as you don't sell it, and it tracks even a year out from now, it's irrelevant. And when eating is a relatively high percentage of your income, that's when we start to have problems. So yeah, generally speaking, the people who are making those decisions, which in this case, let's say politicians, groceries are a relatively low, or groceries or need to purchase things are a relatively low percentage of their spend when compared
Most
to
likely,
the
yeah.
average citizen
Yeah.
in the US.
Well, and if you think about like over the past year, inflation was like 5% or something. I don't
Yeah.
know what it actually was. It was something
It's
way
dependent on each
higher
category, but in general, yeah, I think it's
than a
somewhere around 5%.
typical, 2 or 3% or whatever. You think standard across the board people are getting 5% raises this year?
No, it's not going to happen.
Right. Like 5% is, and that's just to like maintain basically your current purchasing power.
Yeah, that's not even actually
That's
getting a merit increase. Yeah.
right.
And by the way, I think that this is, at least in some ways, further contributing to some of the labor shortages that are being observed. Because essentially, if you were offering $10 per hour to be a burger flipper at McDonald's before, and you're still offering $10 per hour, but anything I'm going to go buy is 5, maybe even in some cases 10% more, right? Like if you think about someone who's flipping burgers at McDonald's, right? Generally, we have people who are maybe in poverty or maybe just getting into the workforce. And I would say, generally speaking, a large percent of the spend for these people is going to be on transportation of some kind. So gas or bus tickets
Essentials.
or
Yeah.
things like that, food. Yeah, we're talking about real essentials here, okay? And these are things that are most definitely going to immediately track with inflation most of the time. And in the case of gas, go up even more than that. So somebody could be literally experiencing an effective inflation rate of 10% for themselves while wages remain completely stagnant.
Mm-hmm.
If all of a sudden you are making 10% less, you very well could say, yeah, screw this. Like, I'll go find something else, or I'll try and figure out something else on my own. A little while back, you and I were going to a talk, and we parked in a parking garage since we were going to a theater in the city where we live in. So we parked in the parking garage downtown, and it's pretty cold right now. It was quite cold, actually, the night that this occurred. And you pulled up the directions on your phone to walk from our parking garage to this theater. I didn't know the address of the theater, and you had the ticket, so because I was driving, so you had it pulled up already. So we were about to walk out of kind of the a hotel area of sorts that's connected to the garage, and before we stepped outside, I said, "Let's just stop here and figure out where we're going." And you said, "No, it's fine. I got it."
Well, I had directions.
Yeah, you quote unquote had directions. So I go, okay. So we step outside, and we're both just hit with a massive gust of cold air because it's freezing outside. And
You didn't have a jacket.
I literally didn't even have a jacket. Yeah. How cold was it?
I don't even know. It was below 10 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, it was cold.
I thought it was somewhere around -10 Celsius.
Okay.
So anyway, we get outside, hit with a massive cold gust of air, and I say, yeah, this is why I wanted to figure it out inside. So we start walking.
But I was like, it's fine. We got directions.
So we start walking 1 block, 2 blocks, 3 blocks. I ask, how much farther are we going? You said something like, oh, we got to keep going up to this one road. It's a little bit farther.
Well, I kept looking at my phone, and it seemed like I was going in the right direction, and it was like, we gotta keep going straight right here. It's just up there. Keep going straight. But then part of the problem was it was so cold. I didn't want to like have my phone out, so I kept like kind of putting, my phone and my hands back in my pockets. Like, okay, let's just walk. So I wasn't actively watching my phone.
Yeah.
That was part of the problem.
So we get, I think it's like half a mile, so 800 meters away from.
It was too far.
we get like get about half a mile from the parking garage, and I turn and I say, I feel like we parked in the wrong parking garage then. If we're walking half a mile in the city, is like we've walked past 4, 5, 6 other parking garage options. What are we doing here? So I finally pull out my phone. I tell her, send me the address that we're trying to get to. I pull it up. Sure enough, it's over half a mile away, and we have to walk back the same direction that we came. So we start walking back. We're jogging at this point, kind of running down these side streets on these paths.
In the dark. In the middle of downtown.
Downtown, it's absolutely freezing out. Finally, we get back, and we go right past the parking garage, right past the doors that we came out. And
like
we
down
walk
2 blocks, and there it is.
We walk 2 or 3 blocks. Yeah, 2 blocks one way, 1 block the other, and boom, we're right at the theater. So the parking garage was likely the correct place to be parking for the event that we were attending.
I was asking, why did the email I got from this theater tell me to park here? This is so far away. We parked where it said. They should not have told us to park there.
So we ran over a mile in the cold, a mile extra in the cold, because
It probably wasn't a full half mile in the wrong direction. It
it
was
was.
it was far, but
It was because when I pulled up the directions, it said 1,000 meters, so a kilometer. And I bet it was probably about 200 meters to go from the parking garage to the theater. So I bet it
I
was
could check. I could
almost
check my
exactly a mile
watch.
more.
I could check my watch how much I closed all my rings that day.
Anyway, so that was an exercise in patience
So that was an example of
and
me
letting go.
me annoying you in the
Yes.
most annoying way possible because you knew that was going to happen.
Yes, and I even commented about it before we stepped outside. Yeah.
So does this maybe partially explain why the flip side of that is maybe so satisfying to you? So like I'm thinking about maybe like think about the GameStop thing, right? You have a bunch of people who are like really trying to like screw people over, right?
Okay.
And then when it like turns back on their face,
The hedge funds.
yeah,
Okay.
and they get just like shut down from it. Like why that's so, because you love when that kind of thing happens.
So
Is that tied to this at all? Where it's like, I don't know if that makes sense. What I'm asking.
sure. So I think what you're saying is, in one case, party A is not receiving the negatives of their poor actions, and instead party B is. And in case two, party A is trying to put down party B, but suffers the consequences. I don't know. I mean, they could very well be related. I most definitely, as I think many can relate, find a sense of joy in that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if this thing that annoys you the most can be boiled down or simplified to when people don't have to face the natural consequences for their poor decisions. I mean, the thing that annoys you is like on top of that, people don't have to face that, and then specifically you have to instead.
Yeah, that's
But
true. That's true.
but could it also be? I mean, could we simplify it to when people don't have to face the negative consequences of their actions?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe you just boil that down to like justice. Where in case one, like it's unjust that someone is suffering the negative consequences of somebody else's choice when they had no control.
Mm-hmm.
And in case two, people who are attempting to do harm or evil of some kind are receiving exactly what they deserve.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, there's a sense of justice that it really comes down to, for sure.
Or like you also have a thing where certain things in society where we don't let people face the natural consequences for their decisions, or when people get bailed out of the natural consequences for the decisions, you get really annoyed by that. That really ticks you off, I think. Maybe it does go back to the justice thing.
Yeah,
But
I think in some of those cases where people don't suffer the negative consequences of their actions, like obviously there's a component of mercy that I think is
yeah,
required,
there's a line. Yeah.
but I think a component of mercy is at least recognition of the mercy that one is receiving first, and second, I think oftentimes what you're referring to, where somebody doesn't suffer the negative consequences of a given action that they've taken, in many of those instances, though admittedly not all, we're playing with a zero-sum game. So it's not just that this one individual is not suffering the negative consequences of his or her actions. It's also that while there may not be one person who's bearing the burden of that negative choice, the negative choice and the burden of that is dispersed amongst a large group of people.
Like society as a whole.
Sure, that may be the case. Now, there are certain things where, well, I'll say, you said something earlier, which is we don't allow somebody to suffer the natural consequences.
Is that different than what you're talking about?
If it's a natural consequence, the price must be paid. The question is who's going to pay it, and I think in a lot of those instances, the answer is, oh well, now it's a massive or a particularly large group of people, in many cases just society at large, that suffers the consequences for the negative choices of one individual.
So think about when all the rioting was going on around the country a couple years ago, right? And you had people looting stores all over the place, and there weren't necessarily consequences. Like, not all of these people faced consequences for that, right?
Yeah,
So then
a large
the people
disproportionate amount of people.
the people who
didn't.
paid those prices were the business owners, or say it was a Target corporation, but there were smaller businesses who were also facing damage and facing issues like that.
Well, okay, so in that case, right, this is not necessarily something that affects just society as a whole, but yeah, it does affect a. Okay, sure. Let's track with that example. So then there are natural consequences to burning down a building. There's no longer a building, right? It's not like we're putting a kid in timeout and we don't need to put a kid in timeout necessarily, right? We could have a sense of mercy and like nothing needs to happen here. In many cases you should, but it's not natural in that there once was something and now there isn't in the physical world. So in that case, someone needs to pay the price to essentially, and maybe this is not the case, but somebody needs to pay for the lost value. Okay? And to your point, okay, a Target is burned down. Target's not actually paying for the lost value. Some insurance company is. Okay? That insurance company is not just going to lose money. Okay? They're going to make money back. Insurance companies are in the business of making money. So what happens is either A, the insurance company needs to raise rates, or B, they're going to suffer some loss. If they suffer some loss, that's going to negatively affect the shareholders. If they don't suffer some loss, then every other paying customer or whatever group that specific Target was lumped in with, so maybe they do it on a regional basis. So now that area of the city, all of the businesses there, even if they weren't burned down, need to pay higher insurance rates because now they're trying to make up for the burned down Target, right? And you can apply this to 50 things, and maybe it's not just Target, maybe it's some small business, or maybe it's somebody's home. Ultimately, some price needs to be paid. It's not being paid by whomever burned this Target or this person's home or whatever down. Period.
Right. Or people are, if there's violence or crime in an area, maybe home values are going down because people are moving out of that area. So that community as a whole pays the price for that in lost home value.
Yeah, and I think this was one of the things that was so sad to me with those riots, which is regardless of what you think happened with the events surrounding the riots or with the riots themselves, regardless of what you think, we should be able to agree on one thing, which is that the people who are getting hurt here are the people in these communities.
Right.
Okay? And I don't think that that's a good thing. It's not like,
like
we are attacking an individual who did something wrong. It's not like we're even attacking some group or some company that did something wrong, right? It's not like, oh, well, BP spilled all this oil in the Gulf and now they need to pay some fine because they spilled the oil in the Gulf and they need to pay for whatever it's going to take to clean it up. Like, that's not what's happening. The people who are paying for this are
the people who are suffering
homeowners.
The consequences most directly are those individuals in the communities.
Yeah. So it's like shooting yourself in the foot. Whether you agree with or you disagree with it. I don't think that that it was good for the people in that community. The people that lived in that community, that lived in that area, the people that were affected by that. I think that this is very sad for them. I think that this is not good for them. And I feel bad that, I feel bad in the sense not that I participated. I feel bad in the sense of sadness for them.
Right.
Empathetically, I feel bad that they're experiencing this but did nothing wrong. Like this
Mm-hmm.
is the type of like injustice in my mind. And we can talk about injustice on a bunch of different levels, okay? But
Yeah, I think what you're saying, a lot of this does come down to a level of injustice that happens that causes that annoyance. Basically, someone needing to face a consequence for something they maybe don't deserve.
yeah.
Like I think that's an interesting tie to, maybe there's a component of justice in there that plays a role in this.
And forget about the people who did it. It's just that this negative thing was perpetrated by people.
Mm-hmm.
And other people are suffering in home values, in lost homes in some cases, in increased insurance,
Mm-hmm.
in not even not feeling safe, in not being able to go down to the Target that they went to before, or the Walgreens, or the insert thing here.
Mm-hmm.
Small businesses in the area. I heard that a number of businesses in that area had to close even though they were not directly affected because,
Well, this was happening all over the country, not
yeah,
just in Minneapolis where it started.
yeah. But
Yeah.
like a number of businesses I heard in the area had to close even though they weren't directly affected because now people don't feel comfortable going in that area. And to me, that's sad when you have people suffering the negative effects of something where, on any level, the reason for the riots themselves, they weren't involved in this,
Mm-hmm.
and they're suffering because of that. And I think that that's really sad. And like from something as trivial as headphones to something as large as losing your home or having your community and having your community and neighborhood destroyed. Like regardless, I think that it's a miscarriage of justice, and it's sad, and it is frustrating to see people suffer the negative consequences of somebody else's decisions, especially when they had no control, and especially when that other person's decisions were bad.
Yeah. That's what annoys you most, huh?
Yes. That's what annoys me most.
So, let me throw out a thought that's maybe a little bit different spin on this.
Okay.
Going in a maybe religious direction here. I mean, we were talking about when people make bad decisions, a price has to be paid somewhere by someone. Sometimes
Yeah.
a price must be paid. So you could say, like, let's extend when we say bad decision, let's say we're talking about a sin, right? A price has to be paid. Like, could we totally make a religious spin on this here and say, like, well, that's like what Jesus did, right? Do you get what I'm saying? Like, we're talking about people not having to pay the consequences for their decisions. I mean, it made me think about humanity's sin and how a price must be paid for that, right?
Yeah.
If not by us, it must be paid, and that's what Jesus did on the cross.
Yeah, and that is part of the reason why earlier I said something along the lines of there most definitely needs to be mercy in many circumstances, but that part of that mercy needs to be mercy, or part of that grace. It needs to be an understanding of the mercy or grace that's extended to you. So for instance, like if we're talking about people who burn down homes and buildings and stuff, right? If insurance companies just foot the cost, or let's say some particularly generous person came in and paid for all of the things, right? So that the community wouldn't be negatively affected, whether by the insurance company or anything else, right? If there is not an individual sitting here up on trial and they say, like, you need to repay $1.2 million. And then they pull up the next individual and they're like, you need to repay $800,000. And then the next person comes up, you need to repay $4 million, right? These people will not understand the gravity of their choices and make a change going forward if they do not first confront essentially the debt that must be paid before they receive that mercy.
Right. Yeah, well, that's a critical part about salvation is
Yes.
understanding the debt that you have, basically.
Yeah.
Because
And
if you don't understand that, how can you understand the extravagance of the cancellation of that debt, basically?
so that, and I would,
Not cancellation, but
the
'cause it's
covering,
not canceled.
let's
The
say.
covering of your debt, yes.
Yeah, that, and I also think without an understanding of what was wrong, you cannot change things going forward. Without pulling that person to the side and being like, you're gonna owe $4 million. Like that's the rest of your life. Like, this could be some particularly young person. The rest of your life, you're going to be working to pay off a debt because of some bad decision that you made when you were insert young age here.
Yeah.
Literally, the
Or
rest of your life.
In the instance with, with your sister breaking the headphones, like,
Yeah.
if she never has to face or realize, like, okay, how much did these headphones cost to replace?
Yeah.
Like, how can she understand truly what happened?
Yeah, and there was never an instance where she was confronted by, like, my mom, let's say, and my mom went, you need to repay your brother for these.
Right.
You need to go buy him new headphones. Like, that never happened. If that had happened, right, and I had gone, look, I forgive you, forget about it, don't do it again, obviously, and learn how to, take better care of things or learn this lesson, right? Then I think it would have landed particularly differently. She would have looked at it and been like, there would be for most people at least, I think there's a mentality shift. There's a belief where you look at it and you go, wow, I almost had to pay, even if it's something like headphones, like I almost had to pay $40
Right.
because because I was careless with this thing, because I was too rough with that or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I think if I understand what you're saying, it's basically just like it's critical to understand basically the severity of like what you've done. Because otherwise, how on earth can you understand the magnitude of you getting away without consequences for it?
Yeah.
I mean, going back to the thing that annoys you the most, I think also part of it is when these things happen and people don't face the consequences and the consequences go on someone else. But then another layer that I think adds to that annoyance and is maybe necessary to be of the level of annoyance that we're talking about is them not actually seeing or understanding what it is they have done. Is
Yeah.
that a factor of it? Like when that happens and people don't actually see or understand really what it is they've done.
Yeah, and I talked about that earlier a bit, where, like, when there's not a recognition of what went wrong,
Right.
nothing's going to change. We're doomed to repeat this, and essentially, if we operate under these same pretenses going forward, this person just screws person after person after person after person after person. And so we just have an endless cycle of this person. Let's say it's breaking something, okay? We have an endless cycle of this person breaking things and not suffering consequences, and then just person after person who was generous and lent them something.
Keeps having to pay the price for it. Yeah.
Exactly. Versus in the other instance where even if there's mercy, right, or grace given for something, that affects one person. And then a change is made, and that person doesn't continue to break things. Or if they have to pay it back, then they paid a price, they learn. That's it.
Yeah, it's interesting how that ties to salvation, because I have thought about this recently in terms of understanding, like, the full truth of the gospel and everything. Like, I think I've recently really come to the more clear and deep understanding that the very critical first step of that, like, you can't get anywhere past if you don't, check off this first step, which is understanding the severity and magnitude of your sin and understanding the sin that is within you. Like, if you don't understand that and you can't grasp that, like, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
You're not going to understand everything, right? Like, isn't this what like Jordan Peterson references a lot about, like, what does he say? Something with the shadow.
Sure. Okay, you're talking about the Jungian integration of the shadow that Peterson
Yeah, maybe.
often discusses. You have to first look in the mirror and understand that not only are you capable of evil, but there's that part inside of you.
Right. And if you don't understand that, like, you're not going anywhere with the gospel. Like, that means nothing to you if you don't understand what it is you've done and what you're guilty of.
Yeah, I think ultimately there needs to be a balance kind of between mercy and grace and holding people accountable and paying a price. But in either case, what we need is that recognition of reality. And either path can result in a good positive change and can be a solution going forward. And it's obviously going to be dependent on the circumstances, right? In some instances, the price needs to be paid because the rest of the community and the person who was wronged can't bear the massive burden that this person who wronged somebody else has put on them, right? And in other instances, the person who's wronged someone also can't bear it. So the community and the person need to step in and surround them. And
or
I think,
in the instance of salvation, like, we are not capable of
Yeah.
bearing the full weight of our sin.
yeah. So it's definitely situationally dependent, but I think in either case there needs to be this recognition of reality itself, of the situation that we're in, and people need to come together and have a discussion about what it is that's happened and options moving forward. And I think in too many cases, people are not even made aware of these things. Or they're not forced to be made aware in certain cases, like with the headphones with my sisters. At no point was she forced to be made aware of the gravity of that choice. It wasn't just wrapping a cord up quick. It was destroying my pair of headphones.
$50-$60 or whatever it was for a 14-year-old or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think ultimately, there are those couple of paths forward, but no matter what happens, we need to have a recognition of the reality of the situation. And too often, I don't see that occurring, and it frustrates me when I see that step one hasn't occurred, and on top of that someone else is suffering because of it, and I can also project forward and see that line of other people who are going to continue to suffer because this person hasn't learned a lesson, one way via grace and mercy, or two, via needing to pay for their actions. Well, it's getting late, but not as late as it would have been yesterday, because today is daylight saving time in the US. And I've been thinking about that a little bit more recently. We jump forward and backward by an hour every year. Well, at least where I live, we do. I know there are some states or some countries, regions that don't do that. I was having a chat with my wife yesterday about it, and we're talking about kind of the rationale for why this may be the case, why we practice daylight saving time. And, I've heard from some people that, it started off to do with farmers and crops and harvesting and things like that. But I think in, our modern time with automated machinery and equipment, things like that, I don't think that holds a whole lot of weight. And Another one that I've heard from people is that kids would be getting on the bus in the dark early in the morning when they're going off to school. But I think in either case, whether we do daylight saving time or not, kids are going to be at some point getting on the bus in the dark. And I don't know, I've kind of been racking my brain as to why we go about this practice. I feel like oftentimes it confuses people and has people late for things or early for things, and just seems like not a great system that maybe we should do away with. Personally, I think that it would be beneficial to stay an hour ahead, but to be honest, I think I'd be fine either way, as long as we could maybe be done with this what I think to be silly practice. With that, thank you all. Have a good night.